I believe that some of the theories, concepts, and principles that I'm about to share with you today can help shape the ways that you all attempt to develop greater movement proficiency within your athletes. This topic that we will be covering is that of the constraints-led approach. Goal with the presentation is really quite simple. We're going to look to go beyond the traditional mindsets to gain a deeper and more thorough understanding regarding the most pertinent movement science concepts, theories, and principles that we need to be aware of and how they serve to impact the ways that athletes will move under the chaos of their sport movement problems. Movement, guys and gals, is the conduit that athletes will use to interact with their sport environment and effectively overcome problems within it. In fact, the control, the coordination, and the subsequent execution of movement are the qualities that ultimately define elite athletes. So let's think about sport movement mastery for a second, because it is what our main goals and objectives really orient themselves around. Many think that movement mastery is simply about performance outcomes. And of course, don't get me wrong, ultimately it is. However, the processes towards achieving those movement outcomes are vital to the athlete's attainment of their personal potential in the long run, as well as their safety, efficiency, and longevity. Now, there are several characteristics of motor performance that I feel defines the masterful moving athlete. Ownership, optimization, virtuosity, efficiency, and effectiveness. Ownership, meaning the athlete's ability to be self-sufficient when moving. Here, the athlete's kinesthetic sense and awareness has become more attuned to the typical problems present within their sport and how to overcome those problems in the most fluid and proficient fashions. The optimization, or the attainment of an authentic movement signature which is specific to the individual and takes advantage of his or her personal characteristics. Thirdly, virtuosity. Here, the athlete's ability to detect errors and then adjust and perform the most optimal motor actions in the ever-changing conditions of sport. Fourthly, efficiency. The athlete utilizes the optimal combination of the human movement system's working mechanisms at hand and thus is more fully able to match force development with force expression in the movement. Fitz and Posner back in '67 then offered a description in a model of motor learning or skill acquisition which attempted to neatly illustrate how motor behavior could change as a function of instruction and practice habits, where the generalized motor program essentially and theoretically would continue to become more fine-tuned to the problems that the sport presents one. As you can see on the model, the learning athlete will go through a continuous and linear process with progressive changes occurring in the nature of the information processing that he or she is capable of. In early stages of this model, the learner attempts to understand how to perform the movement skill. Here they take in and interpret and use information available from a variety of sources, both intrinsic as well as extrinsic. The errors here in this stage will be both frequent and abundant as the athlete partakes in a trial and error type approach of trying to organize a movement solution. As the learner progresses into the second stage, he or she begins to modify that acquired movement pattern and starts to make associations, as the name would imply, between various components of how the skill is being organized. So these ideas then, to help assist us in the understanding of the problems of sport, exist within those held in the dynamical systems theory, ecological psychology, and the use of the constraints-led approach. When we begin to think about those constraints, we think three main constraint factors: the organism, the environment, and the task. The organism, meaning who is the athlete or the performer, the individual's characteristics, their genetics, their anthropometric features, their strengths and weaknesses, as well as their previous learning. The environment, meaning where are they performing, what's the surface, the temperature, the lighting, opponents, boundaries, and also things like social constraints such as support, expectations, and peer groups. All of these things, guys and gals, are going to serve to shape the coordination and control of the emergent movement pattern. And finally, what is the task? Meaning the athlete's intention or expectation of the goal, as well as interaction with rules and teammates and opponents. On the surface, those theories of dynamical systems, ecological psychology, and the constraints-led approach will remind us that the specific problem that the athlete is faced with is based on the constantly changing interaction between these three main constraints areas: the athlete, the task, and the environment. Now, Nikolai Bernstein was the first known motor behavior scientist to study or identify what has become known as that degrees of freedom problem. He did this as he attempted to understand how a human being could organize a very complex human movement system of segments which were linked through joints and muscles in order to move in a variety of ways. The number of ways that the unit is capable of moving is coined as the degrees of freedom. The problem then is essentially answering and understanding how the organism or the athlete will employ and control or constrain the large number of motor system degrees of freedom during movement actions that then turned into sequence patterns. The display of movement at that moment in time will always be a function of the athlete's central nervous system attempting to self-organize the available degrees of freedom into a motor structure. So supplementing our knowledge of movement skill acquisition with Newell's model to go along with the Fitz and Posner stages of learning, we may now be able to see how some of the limitations of traditional movement practices in sports, which involve crisper, pre-planned movement actions carried out in a closed, more predictable environment, again, such as figure skating, dance, track and field. The movement practice activities could be, or maybe should be, driven towards more repetition after repetition end of the spectrum or continuum. However, when sports take place within a more open, unpredictable, and chaotic environment, it's highly likely that our drills must reflect that as well if we ever hope to improve upon the actual skills represented within it. Thus, any drill, in my opinion, being utilized to improve upon movement efficiency and effectiveness should be prescribed in such a way that it serves to enhance some aspect of the three B's of the movement skill, some aspect of the biodynamic structure of the sport movement task, the brain, the behaviors, and the biomechanics.
Thanks for watching this highlight clip. If you want to watch this entire presentation, head over to strengthcoachnetwork.com, and for $1, you can try out the whole site for 24 hours, no strings attached, and get access to this presentation and hundreds more just like it.